Have you ever felt like you're not really making choices, but following a script you didn't write? You react too quickly, apologize too much, stay too long, or run when it gets too real. And deep down, you keep wondering, why do I always do this? Carl Jung had a name for that. Not your personality, not your trauma, but something more ancient, something that explains everything. The archetype. Jung believed we're not born empty. We're born into patterns, stories that live in our psyche long before we have words to describe them. He called them archetypes, universal energies that shape how we love, how we hide, how we ache, and how we heal. And until you recognize the archetype you're playing out, you'll keep calling it fate. This video is not a theory. It's a mirror held up to 5 patterns, 5 truths that silently shape how you live in a world that never taught you to see yourself clearly. Pause here. Did a part of you just whisper, "This is me"? You weren't taught to love your anger, your jealousy, your grief. So you buried them. But what you hide doesn't disappear, it controls you. Jung called this the shadow, the part of yourself you've been taught to disown. The emotions you learned were too much. The desires you were told were selfish. The rage you swallowed to keep the peace. Listen to this story. Sarah was the family peacekeeper. At 7, when her parents screamed through thin walls, she learned that her sadness made everything worse. So she became the happy one, the one who smoothed over tension with a smile. 30 years later, she still can't cry in front of anyone. When her partner tries to comfort her, she pulls away. When friends share their pain, she immediately offers solutions instead of presence. She doesn't understand why intimacy feels suffocating. The shadow holds all you've disowned, and it shows up in your triggers, your fears, your compulsions. That person who irritates you beyond reason, they're reflecting something you've hidden from yourself. Your shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be integrated. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? What emotion have you deemed so dangerous that you'd rather feel nothing than risk feeling it? If this feels uncomfortably familiar, it means you're ready. Don't turn away now. You've worn the nice one, the smart one, the strong one mask for so long. You forgot how your real face looks. This is the persona, the character you perform to survive in the world. And somewhere along the way, you started believing the performance was you. The persona protects you from rejection. It gets you approval, acceptance, maybe even love. But it also separates you from intimacy. Because no one can love who you really are if you never show them. The longer you perform, the more alone you feel, even when surrounded. You know this feeling. You're at a party, laughing at all the right moments, saying all the appropriate things. But inside, there's this hollow ache. This sense that if people knew who you really were, messy, uncertain, sometimes bitter, they'd leave. So you keep performing until one day you realize you don't know where the mask ends and you begin. Jung said the persona is necessary. We need it to function in society. But when it becomes our identity instead of our tool, we lose ourselves in our own performance. Who are you when no one is watching? What would you choose if approval wasn't a factor? Your reaction isn't always about now. It's often about then. That voice inside, afraid, unseen, abandoned, is not weak. It's the inner child, frozen in time, still trying to solve problems that belong to yesterday. Jung understood that we carry within us not just our adult selves, but every age we've ever been. The curious 5-year-old, the wounded 8-year-old, the rebellious teenager. They're all still in there, influencing your choices in ways you don't even realize. When your boss gives you feedback, you don't just hear critique. You hear your father's disappointment. When your partner needs space, you don't just feel alone. You feel that 6-year-old terror of being abandoned. When someone raises their voice, you don't just feel annoyed. You feel small and powerless, the way you did when you were too little to protect yourself. Your inner child holds your wounds, yes, but it also holds your wonder, your creativity, your capacity for joy and spontaneity. The question is, are you parenting this child self, or is this child self parenting you? Marcus was 8 when his mother fell into a deep depression after his father left. Suddenly, his bright, attentive mom became distant, unreachable. She'd stare out windows for hours, barely responding when he tried to get her attention. He learned that his needs were too much, his energy too loud, his very presence somehow wrong. So he became the good boy, the quiet one, the one who took care of himself, so Mom didn't have to worry. He made his own sandwiches, did his own laundry, walked on eggshells around her fragile emotions. At 32, he still shrinks when people withdraw. A delayed text sends him spiraling into stories about what he did wrong. A quiet moment in conversation feels like rejection. He overcompensates with jokes, with service, with making himself smaller and less threatening. He doesn't realize he's still 8 years old, still trying to win back a mother who was never really gone, just lost in her own pain. In his relationships, he becomes the caretaker, the one who anticipates needs and prevents problems. He's attracted to people who are emotionally unavailable because unavailability feels like home. He mistakes anxiety for love because if someone doesn't trigger his abandonment fears, it doesn't feel real. This is how the inner child runs your adult life when left unattended. It makes decisions based on old information, reacts to present situations with past emotions, and keeps you trapped in patterns that may have made sense when you were 7 but serve no purpose now. Your inner child doesn't need logic. It needs your presence. It needs you to turn toward that frightened part of yourself and whisper, "I see you. I'm here now. You're safe." What age do you become when you're triggered? What does that younger version of yourself need to hear? You've carried this long enough. Let yourself be still for once. We fall in love with what we project. The fantasy, the missing part, the one who completes us. But love built on projection always collapses. And when it does, it leaves you more alone than before. Jung spoke of the Anima and Animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies we all carry, regardless of gender. When these energies remain unconscious, we seek them in others. We fall in love with our own projections, our own unlived potential reflected back to us. You've done this. You meet someone and think, finally, someone who gets me. But what you're really seeing is your own disowned qualities mirrored in them. The woman who falls for the brooding artist is often seeking her own creative depths, her own emotional intensity. The man enchanted by the nurturing caregiver might be longing for his own capacity for tenderness, his own ability to create and sustain life. The intellectual who's drawn to the free spirit is seeking their own spontaneity. The people pleaser who's attracted to the rebel is seeking their own ability to say no. This isn't wrong. Attraction often begins this way. The problem comes when you never reclaim these projections, when you never develop your own inner artist, your own inner nurturer, your own inner rebel. Then you spend your life chasing others to complete what you've abandoned in yourself. Listen to Emma's story. Emma was raised to be practical. Emotions were messy. Creativity was impractical, and dreams were for people who didn't understand how the real world worked. She became an accountant, married a reliable man, lived a sensible life. But she was dying inside. Then she met Alex, a musician with wild curls and paint under his fingernails. He talked about art like it was religion, felt everything deeply, lived like every moment was a canvas waiting to be painted. She fell hard. For the first time in her life, she felt alive, electric, like she was finally meeting herself in another person. But Alex wasn't just her lover. He was carrying her disowned creativity, her abandoned passion, her exiled emotional depth. Instead of reclaiming these qualities in herself, she lived them vicariously through him. When the projection collapsed, as projections always do, she felt betrayed, abandoned, like he'd taken her very soul with him. But the truth was, she'd never owned her soul in the first place. She'd given it to him to carry. This is what Jung meant when he said, until you make relationship with your own inner masculine or feminine, you'll chase others to complete what you've disowned in yourself. Real love begins when you stop needing someone to be your missing piece. When you can appreciate their qualities without needing to possess them. When you can love them for who they are rather than who you need them to be. Who have you fallen in love with that might have been carrying a projection? What qualities do you seek in others that you've abandoned in yourself? You're not here to become perfect. You're here to become whole. And that includes the part of you you've been avoiding. Jung called this the self. Not the ego self that wants to look good, but the deeper self that simply wants to be real. The self that existed before you learned to be anyone for anyone else. This is the voice you've learned to doubt. The one that says, maybe this isn't for you, when everyone expects you to stay. The one that draws you towards solitude when the world demands performance. The one that feels tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of being anyone but who you actually are. You've been taught to override this voice, to push through, to be grateful, to be realistic, to think of others, to consider your responsibilities. But what if that whisper is your truest compass? The self doesn't demand perfection. It invites integration. It whispers, what if nothing inside you is unworthy of love? What if you don't need to earn your place here? What if you're already enough? This is the part of you that knows things without being taught, that feels drawn to certain places, people, experiences without logical reason, that sometimes needs to say no without justification or yes without guarantee. It's the part of you that dreams at night, that gets lost in music, that feels moved by beauty for no practical reason. It's your intuition, your inner knowing, your connection to something larger than your individual story. The self is not a goal you achieve. It's a remembering of who you were before the world taught you to be divided against yourself. When do you feel most like yourself? What activities make you lose track of time? What does your soul crave when all the noise quiets down? Then something shifts. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking, what pattern am I in? It happens in a moment. You're in the middle of your usual reaction. Maybe you're over-explaining to someone who's already checked out, or apologizing for having needs, or shape-shifting to match what you think someone wants to hear. And suddenly you see it. You see the pattern playing out in real time. You see yourself as if from above, watching this ancient dance you've been doing for decades without realizing it. You realize this isn't personal. It's archetypal. You're not broken. You're not uniquely damaged. You're just running ancient programming that once kept you safe, but now keeps you small. Sarah, the woman who couldn't cry, had this moment during a fight with her partner. She was doing her usual thing, minimizing her hurt, making it about his feelings instead of hers, performing the I'm fine dance she perfected over 30 years. And then she hurt herself, really hurt herself. She heard the 7-year-old girl who learned that her sadness broke things, that her needs made problems, that her emotions were too much for the adults around her to handle. And in that moment of recognition, something cracked open. She stopped talking. She felt the tears she'd been holding for decades. She let them come, even though every cell in her body screamed that this was dangerous, that this would ruin everything. Her partner didn't leave. He didn't get angry. He didn't make it about him. He held space. For the first time in decades, her authentic pain was met with love instead of fear. This is what Jung meant by making the unconscious conscious. Not analyzing yourself to death, but catching the pattern in real time and choosing differently. When you name the pattern, you interrupt it. You create space between stimulus and response, between trigger and reaction, between past and present. You make a different choice. You walk away sooner. Speak softer. Say no without guilt. You love without losing yourself. You succeed without abandoning your values. You live from awareness, not programming. Marcus started noticing when his 8-year-old self was running the show. When a friend took hours to respond to a text, he'd feel that familiar panic, that story spiral about what he'd done wrong, how he was too much, how he'd ruined everything again. But instead of falling into the old pattern, he'd pause. Oh, there's my child self, afraid of being too much. And he'd breathe. He'd place his hand on his heart and speak to that young part of himself. You're not too much. You never were. Mom was just in pain, and it had nothing to do with you. The friend would text back hours later with some mundane reason for the delay. Traffic, work emergency, phone died. Every single time, the pattern began to loosen its grip. Emma started recognizing her projection patterns. When she found herself enchanted by someone's creativity or emotional depth, instead of losing herself in them, she'd ask, "What quality am I seeing in them that I've abandoned in myself?" She started painting again, badly at first, then with growing confidence. She let herself feel deeply, express honestly, create imperfectly. She reclaimed the artist she'd buried under decades of practicality. And something beautiful happened. She stopped needing to find herself in other people. She could appreciate their gifts without possessing them, love them without losing herself. You start recognizing your persona moments, when you're performing instead of being present. Your shadow eruptions, when your unprocessed pain gets triggered and projects onto others. Your inner child reactions, when past wounds drive present choices. And in that recognition, choice becomes possible. This is where Jung's genius becomes clear. He didn't say to get rid of these patterns. He said to integrate them. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your disowned power. Your persona isn't fake. It's your adaptive intelligence. Your inner child isn't weakness. It's your capacity for wonder and authenticity. Your projections aren't failures. They're maps to your unlived potential. They all belong to you. The work isn't to eliminate them. It's to consciously relate to them, to become the loving parent of your own psyche. Sarah learned to acknowledge her shadow rage without letting it control her. "I notice I'm furious right now," she'd say to her partner. "Let me take a moment to understand what this is about before I say something I'll regret." She discovered that her anger often carried important information about boundaries crossed, needs unmet, values compromised. When she stopped fearing it, it became her ally, her guide to what mattered most. Marcus learned to parent his inner child instead of letting it parent him. When the old abandonment fears arose, he'd place his hand on his heart and whisper, "I see you, little one. I'm here. We're safe now. You don't have to figure this out alone anymore." The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled his choices. He could feel afraid and still act from love. Feel uncertain and still move forward. Feel young and still make adult decisions. Emma learned to appreciate her animus, her inner masculine energy, without projecting it onto partners. She developed her own capacity for action, decision-making, adventure. She could be with a partner without needing them to complete her. David learned to loosen his persona without abandoning it entirely. He could be professional at work without being false, successful without being soulless. He found ways to let his authentic self shine through the required roles. Take a breath. Do you feel the shift happening inside you right now? Do you sense the possibility of a different way of being? And this is where your story begins to change. Not because someone saved you, but because you saw yourself. You realize you don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. You don't need to have it all figured out to be enough. You don't need to eliminate parts of yourself to be acceptable. You just need to stop abandoning yourself. The Jungian path isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about reclaiming what you've disowned. It's about bringing light to the parts of yourself you've kept in shadow. It's about integrating all the aspects of your psyche into a conscious, loving whole. It's about coming home to yourself. This isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a daily practice of returning to yourself, of asking, what part of me am I rejecting right now? What pattern am I unconsciously playing out? What does my soul need in this moment? And then, with infinite tenderness, choosing to turn toward instead of away. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Not who you think you should be, not who others expect you to be, but who you are in your essence, beneath all the adaptations and masks and protective strategies. What would it feel like to love all of yourself? What would change in your life if you stopped fighting with your own nature? So what do you do with this awareness? You don't rush to fix it. You witness it. When the shadow rises, pause. Don't act from the trigger. Don't push it away. Ask, what is this anger trying to tell me? What boundary has been crossed? What need has been ignored? Your shadow often carries the very energy you need to create change in your life. When the persona mask tightens, breathe. Notice when you're performing instead of being present. When you catch yourself saying what you think people want to hear instead of what's true. You don't have to drop the mask entirely. Just loosen it. Let a little authenticity seep through. When the inner child aches, hold space. Don't abandon that young part of yourself the way others might have abandoned you. Place your hand on your heart. Speak to that tender part of yourself the way you would speak to any frightened child. When projection begins, return inward. When you find yourself enchanted or repulsed by someone, ask, what am I seeing in them that I've disowned in myself? What quality am I projecting that I need to reclaim? And when the self whispers, listen, that quiet voice that knows, that part of you that sees beyond the drama, beyond the patterns, beyond the fear. Trust it. Jung called this process individuation, becoming whole by making the unconscious conscious. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you've always been beneath the adaptations, beneath the masks, beneath the patterns you created to survive. Let me tell you about Elena. For years, she lived in her head, analytical, controlled, dismissive of anything that seemed too emotional or irrational. She prided herself on being logical, practical, unswayed by feelings. But she was also exhausted, disconnected. Her relationships felt flat, her work felt mechanical, and she couldn't understand why life felt so empty. During a particularly difficult period, she started having vivid dreams. Wild, colorful, chaotic dreams that her rational mind wanted to dismiss. But something about them felt important. She began to journal about them, and slowly, she realized her dreams were showing her everything she'd exiled from her conscious life: creativity, intuition, emotional depth, spontaneity. She'd been so afraid of being too much that she'd become too little. She started small. She bought watercolors and painted badly. She danced alone in her apartment. She let herself cry during movies. At first, it felt ridiculous. But gradually, she felt herself coming alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Her relationships deepened. Her work became more creative. She stopped needing everything to make logical sense before she could trust it. She was integrating her disowned feminine energy, her anima, as Jung would call it. This is individuation, not becoming perfect but becoming whole. What part of yourself have you exiled in the name of being acceptable? Jung understood something our culture has forgotten. You can't individuate in a crowd. There are moments when you need to step away from the noise, the opinions, the expectations, and listen to your own voice. This isn't selfish. It's necessary. You need time to notice your patterns without performing for anyone. Time to feel your feelings without having to explain them. Time to remember who you are when you're not being anyone for anyone else. In solitude, your persona relaxes. Your true self emerges. This is why Jung valued dreams, active imagination, creative expression, all the ways your unconscious speaks when your conscious mind stops controlling. Create space for this. Even 10 minutes of quiet reflection can shift everything. Ask yourself, who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually want, not what I think I should want? Here's what Jung knew that most people never learn. You cannot individuate and be liked by everyone. As you become more authentic, some people will be uncomfortable. As you set boundaries, some people will be disappointed. As you stop performing, some people will feel abandoned. This is not cruelty. This is growth. Your job is not to manage other people's comfort with your evolution. Sarah learned this when she stopped being the family peacekeeper. Some relatives accused her of becoming selfish and difficult, but the people who truly loved her celebrated her authenticity. Marcus learned this when he stopped overgiving to prove his worth. Some friends drifted away, but the ones who remained loved him for who he was, not what he could do for them. Elena learned this when she stopped dismissing her intuitive insights to appear more rational. Some colleagues were uncomfortable with her new creativity, but others were inspired by her courage to be more fully herself. Individuation requires the courage to disappoint people who prefer your mask to your face. Are you ready to be disliked for being real instead of loved for being fake? The truth is, you were never broken. You were just carrying stories that weren't yours. Patterns that began before you had a name for pain. Stories about what it means to be lovable, valuable, safe. Stories about which parts of yourself are acceptable and which must be hidden. But now you see the pattern, you feel the shift, and you hear the invitation. The invitation to stop reacting from your wounds and start responding from your wisdom. To stop performing your worth and start embodying it. To stop searching for yourself in places that only reflect the mask. Here's what Jung understood about human nature. We are not just individuals. We are expressions of universal patterns that have existed for millennia. The hero's journey, the great mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the lover. These energies live within you. They shape your dreams, your attractions, your fears, your gifts. When you understand this, you stop taking your struggles so personally. Your tendency to save others, that's the rescuer archetype. Your fear of abandonment, that's the orphan. Your drive to achieve, that's the warrior. None of these are wrong. They're just energies seeking expression and integration. The question isn't, how do I get rid of this pattern? The question is, how do I relate to this energy consciously instead of being possessed by it? As you begin to see your patterns, be gentle with yourself. You develop these adaptations for good reasons. That people-pleasing persona, it kept you safe in a family that couldn't handle your authenticity. That emotional armor, it protected you from rejection. These patterns served you once. They're not your enemy. They're old friends who haven't gotten the memo that you're grown now, that you have more choices, that you can handle more truth. Thank them for their service. And then, gently, show them a new way. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you think you should be. Not who others expect you to be. Who you truly are. Individuation is not a destination. It's a daily practice of returning to yourself. Some days, you'll catch your patterns early and choose differently. Other days, you'll find yourself deep in old reactions before you notice. This is normal. This is human. The goal isn't perfection. It's consciousness. Every time you catch yourself in a pattern and choose differently, you're individuating. Every time you turn toward a disowned part of yourself with compassion instead of judgment, you're healing. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you're coming home. Because everything you need is already within. The shadow that holds your disowned power. The child that holds your wonder. The anima or animus that holds your creative potential. The self that holds your deepest knowing. You don't need more answers. You just need to trust what's always been trying to guide you back to your own wholeness. Jung spent his life studying the human psyche, and he discovered something revolutionary. We are not broken beings seeking to be fixed. We are whole beings seeking to remember our wholeness. The journey isn't about adding something to yourself. It's about removing the barriers to what you already are. It's about peeling away the layers of conditioning, the masks of adaptation, the armor of protection, and rediscovering the luminous being you were before the world taught you to be anyone else. And if you've made it this far, if something in these words has stirred something awake in you, then you already know the journey has begun. Take a moment, breathe, feel what's moving inside you. You're not the same person who started watching this video. You've seen something, remembered something, awakened something. Trust that. Trust the stirring. Trust the knowing. Your wholeness is not a destination to reach. It's a homecoming to who you've always been. And the door has always been open. If this resonated with your soul, if you found yourself in these words, I invite you to subscribe for more content that speaks to the depths rather than the surface. Because we're not just building a channel here, we're building a community of people brave enough to look within and wise enough to trust what they find. The journey of individuation is not meant to be walked alone. Welcome home to yourself.